Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Harry Lausaniziris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. We're going now to continue the coverage of the New York State Chess Championship that took place a little bit more than a week ago in Albany, New York. In this video, we are covering round number 3. In the first 2 rounds, if you've seen the videos, I started with a win in round number 1 and loss in round number 2. But before I start the coverage, I have some very, very exciting news to share with you. Today in Uzbekistan at the FIDE Grand Swiss, my compatriot Nicolas Theodorou defeated none other than the world champion Gukesh Tomaraju. Tomaraju that won the world championship recently against Ding Liren from China, and my compatriot and Facebook friend Nicolas Theodorou, with the black pieces, defeated Gukesh Tomaraju. Nicolas, congratulations. The Greek chess world is very, very proud of you. But after this exciting news, perhaps in the future we might be able to cover this game. Let's continue with the New York State Chess Championship. And first of all, let's give a look at the announcement with the rules. The 147th Annual New York State Championship. There were various sections depending on the skills of the players. The champion would be the winner, the player with the most points from the championship section, of course, but it was open only to players with a rating 1900 and above. And myself with a rating of 1582, well, I was way below the cutoff limit. But for people below that limit, there were sections under 2100, under 1800, that is where I participated, and the 2 lowest ones that were below my rating, the under 1500 and the under 1200. And what are the rules? 6 rounds, meaning every player could play 6 games. Of course, win is 1 point, draw is half, and loss is 0 points. The time control 40-80, meaning in the first 40 most players who to complete them in 80 minutes. With a sudden death 30, which means that if the game went on and the players have not exhausted their times, then to whatever time was remaining, they could add another 30 minutes. And there is a D30, which means delay 30 seconds. When it is your time to play, for the first 30 seconds, the clock does not move. And then it starts taking from your time, which means that if you can complete the move in less than 30 seconds, it doesn't cost you any time, among others. My opponent for round number 3. It was Eugeniusz Kizysztof Lugowski, that's his name. And let's look at his numbers. His rating was 1519. Of course, these are the ratings before the championship. And he's in the 84th percentile. Compare this with my numbers. 1582, as I had mentioned before, 86th percentile. And clearly this makes me the favorite. The odds are on my side, but that doesn't mean too much. Let's see what happened at the actual game. We're going to the chess.com webpage and to its computer. We're going to leave for now the page with the win of Nicolas Theodorou. We're going to go to the analysis. Once again, as I've mentioned in the past, on the left side of the board, you're going to see the computer board. What is the current chess position? And of course, now you're going to see the starting position. On the right half, under the word analysis, we are going to see the computer evaluation with positive number, meaning white is better, negative number, black is better. If the move played was the best, if not, which should have been the best move, and what are the 3 best moves for the other player whose turn is to come. And I have the white pieces, Eugeniusz has a black, and I start with my pawn going to e4 to open the diagonals, both my f1 bishop and my d1 queen. And Eugeniusz replies a symmetric way, pawn to e5. My knight goes to f3, the standard thing now, and Eugeniusz places his knight on c6. This has been played many, many times, and the most popular continuations are for white to put bishop to b5, which is called the Spanish or Ruy Lopez opening, to c4, the Italian opening, but I played something slightly different. Pawn goes to d4. This is called the Scotch opening, also a book move. And Eugeniusz, instead of taking the pawn, he played something a little bit different that I don't think it's a part of the theory. He moved his pawn to f6, and the computer thinks it's a mistake and gives me an advantage of 173. And yes, when I saw it, I also felt something strange about the move. Immediately, it doesn't lose a game, but if I played correctly, it could give me an advantage. How to continue? Pawn takes to e5. Pawn takes to e5 from Eugeniusz. What you're going to see is that with the f-pawn gone, the diagonal from h5 to e8 is open, and currently my knight on f3 doesn't allow the queen to go there, but if the queen could go to h5, it could create a lot of damage. How to continue? Not easy to take the bishop because, of course, he cannot take it. It's going to be taken by the... Not easy, I'm sorry, to take the knight because and liberate the queen because here it will be taken, here it can be attacked and so on. So let's first develop the bishop goes to c4. This is a computer, and Eugeniusz places his knight on f6. It's a good move because if by any chance my queen would be free to go to h5, he would definitely not do it because it would be taken by the knight. I send my knight to g5. By doing so, I both defend the pawn on e4, because before it was under attack, the knight on f6 would attack it, and also create a possibility of sending bishop or knight on f7. If bishop goes, it's with a check. If knight goes, it has a fork. But Eugeniusz is stopping any such ideas with moving the pawn to d5. I take it. And now the knight on c6 is attacked. Eugeniusz will send his knight to a5, not only defending the knight, but also attacking my bishop on c4. Until now, you see, other than the pawn goes to f6, it seems the other moves are, if not the best, at least excellent moves. My bishop goes to b5 to check. And what usually is done, just like a computer thinks it's inaccuracy, would rather have my bishop go back to d3, but this has the ideas of an opening called the fried liver. It's not exactly the fried liver, but there are some similarities. In such cases, usually the black player would put the pawn on c6 and attack the bishop. And if pawn takes, then the knight can take back. But instead, Eugeniusz plays his bishop on d7. The moment I saw that, I knew I had an opportunity. It's a mistake as a computer. I felt I have an opportunity. Of course, during the game, without a computer assistance, there's no way to know. It's very rare that you can have 100% certainty of a position. But I knew that something good would come if I placed my knight on e6, which is the best move. It's a great move as a computer. Yes, I felt that there is something great. Why? I'm attacking the queen. The queen needs to move. It cannot be taken by the bishop because the bishop is pinned, the bishop on d7. My knight at the very minimum can take the bishop on f8, so even if it's attacked in the future, at least it will take back, don't lose any material. How does black respond? Basically, there are two moves to do. Either the queen goes to e7. In this case, I'm taking the pawn on c7 and forking the rook, or the other one, the best move is queen goes to c8. Believe it or not, the computer would rather have black lose their queen, take my bishop, and then I take the queen. If I was black, I would never have played this thing. play queen to c8 and see what can happen. Now, of course, my bishop is in danger because there is no threat to the queen. I take the other bishop on d7. And queen takes it. My knight is safe because of the pawn is safe because of the queen. Time to continue expanding if you don't have anything concrete in attacking and everything is safe. Continue the development. I'm castling for white. Computer would rather have me put the bishop on g5, but considers excellent my move. And Eugene feels he has a free pawn. Takes the pawn on d5 and is very happy that he got an extra pawn. In fact, he got his pawn back that he was a pawn behind. But when I saw it, I knew what I could do, because this is something that beginners may not be familiar, but sometimes, especially in the opening, such cases, you have to be ready to grab the opportunity. You see, the computer considers this to be inaccuracy and gives me an advantage of 4.85, almost a rook. Because when I saw that, I knew what I had to do. After some thought and some double check, I take the knight on d5. And you may be wondering, you're going to lose your queen for a knight. Is this a fair trade? Well, Eugeniusz would not take my queen. Why? I'm going to explain why. Because if he takes it, knight goes to c7, grab a pawn, grab the queen back because of the fork. And then my opponent realized the mistake he had done, and since if you're ahead in material, you want to exchange pieces, and when you're behind, you don't want it. That's why he preferred not to exchange the queens and not to lose the pawn, so he puts his bishop on d6. Now I need to be careful. Still, my knight on e6 is not in danger because it's attack once and defend once. But if I'm not careful and do something, for example, develop another piece here, then if the pawn goes to c6, my queen cannot defend the knight any longer. Because to defend the knight, it must be on the diagonal from a2 to g8, this diagonal, and both these two squares where the queen is free to go are attacked by the knight on a5. That is why try not to defend a piece that may not be defensible after all, but since I can do, why not take the other piece on a5? I'm a piece ahead, so I'm going to exchange the knights. And yes, my opponent takes my knight on e6. I'm a piece ahead, but queen exposed, if I'm not careful, it's very, very easy to lose the queen or blunder who knows what. What can I do? Let's do a check on b5. And my opponent blocks with the pawn on c6, attacks my queen. What can I do? The easiest thing to do is take the pawn on b7 and increase my material advantage, but here there's a problem. The problem is that if my opponent castles and then places a rook on b8, my queen is under attack. And if I'm not careful, who knows where this could lead to. Better stay with the extra piece that I have instead of gambling for an extra pawn. Queen goes to b3. I want to exchange queens. It'd be wonderful if I could do it, and my opponent doesn't like it. Places queen on d7. Develop now my knight to c3, and long castling for my opponent. My opponent is trying to see, of course, it's the case where I have been. If you lose a piece, you try to stay in the game, try not to exchange pieces, try to set traps or swindles, as they are called, to your opponent. Try to see if it's possible to make your opponent make a mistake. I continue developing. Bishop goes to e3 and attacks the pawn. Now one needs to be careful. If I take the pawn, currently it's free, but if my opponent could defend the b6 pawn, then my bishop at a7 could be lost. My opponent prefers to directly save it. So if the pawn places his pawn on b6, no, I cannot take the pawn, otherwise I lose my bishop. Rook goes to d1. And by doing so, I pin the bishop at d6. It cannot move. Queen goes to d7 to get rid of the pin. My knight goes to e4. I want at the very minimum exchange on d6 with this bishop, if possible, of course, win material. Bishop goes to e7. So the idea of taking the bishop is not feasible any longer, but at least I can exchange the rooks. My plan is exchange as many pieces as possible and stay with an extra piece. Of course, I want to make sure that there are pawns on the board, because if I only have an extra piece, light piece, bishop or knight, without the pawns, that is not winning, it's a draw. I want to exchange even more. My bishop goes to g5. My opponent bet exchange, otherwise you're going to see what's going to happen. If opponent tries to avoid exchange and move the bishop, then I take the rook and I win an exchange. Rook goes to d4. So now the exchange is starting. I take the bishop. Opponent takes the bishop, but now I have to be careful because my knight is in danger. I place it to g3. As you may see, if I commit a mistake and lose a piece, it would be equal. The position would be equal. Yes, I have a small advantage because the pawn on e5 is isolated, but really, if I blunder and I lose a piece, then things could be very nasty. Nasty in the sense I would have to start fighting again from scratch. My opponent places his rook on d5. Why? To avoid my queen going to g8, checking and taking the h7 pawn, or also avoiding fork on f5. Knight goes to f5 and threatens queen and rook. I place my pawn on c3 now to liberate, give my queen the option to go to c2 and have the c3 pawn defended by b2 and not relying on the queen. Queen goes to d6. I still have to be very careful with my back rank. For the time being, there is enough coverage. The d1 square is protected twice. And worst comes to worst, the knight from g3 can go to f1 and cover the check. But I want to liberate myself from this worry. First of all, let's put my queen on c2 to attack the pawn on h7. Pawn goes to g6. If my opponent would not do that, would I take on h7? It's nice to have the extra pawn, but with rook going to d1, I would have to be very, very careful. My knight goes to e4 to attack the queen. Queen goes to g8. If to d8. If queen went to d7, knight on f6 is a4. My pawn goes to f3, give extra coverage to the knight and somewhat helping with the background issue. King goes to b7. My knight goes to f2. And the rook goes to d2. Here you have to be careful. Black rook is attacking the white queen. If I take, of course, the rook, then the queen will take my queen. That is why my queen goes to b3. In addition, you see that if the queen went anywhere else, for example, in e4, I would lose the b2 pawn. Pawn goes to b5 for black. My rook goes to d1. What I want to do is exchange, continue exchanging. And instead of directly exchanging, my opponent, Eugeniusz, places his pawn on a5. He wants to have some counterplay on the queen side of the pawns. If I took the rook, then the black rook the black queen, excuse me, takes my rook and threatens checkmate on e1. No matter how much ahead you are, if you're not careful, you could suddenly be checkmated out of nowhere. We finished 30 moves. I have an advantage of 4.57 and a +1 piece in material. At this point, I saw that there was a way to defend against a checkmate, so we exchanged the rooks. Queen is on d2, and if I'm not careful, queen to e1 is checkmate, but I have seen it, and I had seen the defense. King goes to f1, so it's not possible any longer. The queen could check from c1, but then I would think how to defend, most likely with my knight, because if I put my queen, I lose my d2 pawn, but my opponent decided not to put me to the test, sends the queen back to d7 to see how he can continue the game. My queen goes to d1, trying either to exchange queens, or if my opponent refuses to exchange the queens, the d file is open and it belongs to my queen. Eugeniusz places his queen on f7, and yes, at this point, my queen has full control of the open d file. Rooks and queens love to have control of open files. My pawn goes to b3 because my pawn at a2 was attacked. My opponent places his king on b6. My knight goes to f4 to conduct attack. If it goes to d6, for example, it threatens the queen. Queen goes to f8 to avoid any such possibility, and also to deprive my queen of checking from d8. So my queen goes to d6, and here I quote unquote propose, not verbal of course, but through my move, an exchange of queens. What would happen if black would refuse to exchange the queens? Then my queen could go, for example, either to b8 and check, and thinking to go to a6, and we're very near checkmate. Or if the queen stayed on the 8th rank, my queen could win the e5 pawn, or go to c5 and check, or many other things. So my opponent preferred that the minimum damage for him was to exchange the queens, which we do. And believe it or not, the computer thinks that exchanging the queens would be the best for my opponent. And now the situation is much simpler for me. And I'm going to say why it is simpler, because I don't have to worry about blundering my queen. And I don't have to worry about the queen suddenly coming from the other end of the board and checkmating me, or forking king and knight. From now on, it looks to be straightforward, but still I need to be very careful, because it's wonderful to have an extra knight, but if black can promote any of the 6 pawns, they have the advantage. Yes, for the time being, none of them is passed, they are blocked, but if I'm not careful, who knows? King goes to c5 to threaten my knight. My knight goes to e4 check. King goes to d5. And now knight goes to f6 check and a fork. If the king goes to d6, I grab the h7 pawns. At this point, in addition to having a knight, I have an extra pawn. Black pushes his pawn to c5. Black wants to initiate a kind of exchange of the pawns on which side, the ABC. And if he's lucky and successful enough, maybe one of them can be able to pass and promote, and my king is not near enough to stop them. Not very easy, but not completely impossible if one is not careful. That is why instead of me, I could easily go for the g6 pawn, but leave it for later. First of all, safeguard myself. King goes to e2, king goes to e6 for black. Knight goes to g5. I want also the knight to be near the queen side to make sure that none of these 3 pawns can create havoc. King goes to f5. Knight goes to e4 now, threatening the pawn at c5. If with 3 against 3 pawns, it's going to be hard for black to promote. If they lose one of them with 2 of them versus 3 for white, it will be impossible. That's why they move the pawn on c4. Exchange. Exchange. pawns are blocking each other. And now my knight goes to d6 and checks. And no matter what black does, the pawn at c4 is lost. The computer gives me at this point an advantage of 8.19, even though they would prefer if I checked with a g4 pawn. I also thought during the game, but I felt like that I have sure the c4 pawn. And the computer believes that there is a straightforward way to mate, although it could take 35 moves, the m35. At this point, my opponent, Eugeniusz Lugowski, resigned. Eugeniusz, thanks for the game. And I'd like to say that whether I win or lose, I always respect my opponents. Doesn't matter what is the result. I respect the effort they put and the dedication to the game of chess. But at this point, we're going to continue a little bit more and look at the review. See how did the game go. What does the chess.com computer have to say? By the way, just to tell you, I haven't said this previous games, the way I put the moves, the computer does not know which player is playing them. So the review we get is objective, because if I put my name as white and perhaps Eugeniusz as black, then the computer might use our past games to evaluate. But now it has no idea who is playing. So the review is objective. Let's see what's going to happen now. 91.2 for me accuracy versus 86.1 for black. Of course, 91.2 for me is wonderful, but Nicolas Theodoro, when he beat grecochess, he was in the 96%. And computer thinks that I played as if I was rated 2450 versus 1800 for Eugeniusz. Both of us way above our ratings. And yes, I feel I played well, but I doubt I was that good. Let's see the various categories. One brilliant move for me and one great move. Best 13 for me versus 15 for my opponent. Excellent 25 for me, 22 for my opponent. Two good moves each of us. Book 3 moves for me, 2 for my opponent. It was unfortunate for my opponent that from his third move he deviated from the book and did not even play a good move. From that point on, it was downhill. No inaccuracies and 3 mistakes for my opponent, and neither misses nor blunders. And thus, it is Sunday, August 31st, and after the morning game, in fact, this game started at noon. After this game, I had 2 wins and 1 loss, and one, I would say, painful loss. You remember, I could easily have won that game. Easily, no, but I had the odds on my side before I blundered. A little bit time to relax, but soon round number 4 is starting. Let's see what is going to happen at round number 4. I'm going to present this in the next video. For now, I'd like to thank once again all my viewers, my subscribers, people that have liked my views, people that have left comments, especially nice, encouraging comments. Once again, congratulations to Nicolas Theodorou for his great victory against grecochess Domaraju. I am Harilaos Aniziris. This is grecochess. Goodbye.